9 o'clock. Shall we start? So welcome everyone to our meeting today of the Planning and Climate Change Committee. And first up, say kia ora and feel free to join in if you want. Whakataka taho ki te uru, whakataka taho ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tarata ki tai, e hi aki ana ti atakura, he ti o te huka, he heihu, ti he moriora. Okay, so apologies. We have one forum, Councillor Munt for lateness. We have Councillor Hassan and Councillor Glidden online, I assume. Can't see them up. I think that's it. Oh, mate. Megan as well for lateness, that's right.
I'm going to apologise, I may need to leave at 11:30. We're still going 11:30.
Is that a challenge to be finished by then? Is it? It's very subtle.
Yes.
Okay, so identification of any extraordinary business. Nope. Go on to the next one. Conflicts of interest. Yes, that's no. Public forum. So we have Prue them coming up to talk to us. Is Colin going first? Cool. So you have 10 minutes and that includes any questions from council.
Thank you. Is that combined with Prue, 10 minutes, or is that just myself?
I think my understanding was that it was separate. I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fine. I'll only be 5 minutes anyway.
Yep.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Colin Hay and I own property at number 34 Rossington Drive, Gainsborough in West Melbourne. Now, there's a copy of the Gainsborough subdivision plan up on the screen there. 9 months ago, I retired after 33 years with Waka Kotahi, where for the last 25 years, I was employed as a highways engineer. I briefly want to speak about the subdivision proposed by RDUs Limited for the eastern side of West Melbourne, adjacent to Gainsborough subdivision. Formerly, this was part of Plan Change 74, and the proposed roading connections through Gainsborough. If you're not familiar with this proposal, I'd urge you to look at it closely when the subdivision plan is resubmitted by RDUs under the revised district plan. The connection of the proposed development through Gainsborough is not compliant with the operative or proposed district plan. Initially, this access was proposed as just a pedestrian cycle access, and around 18 months ago, it was surveyed off at approximately 6 metres wide and pegged at number 36 Rossington, and those pegs are still present in the ground now. As planning for the proposed subdivision progressed under Plan Change 74, it was subsequently dimensioned at 11 metres wide on the proposed draft subdivision concept plan dated May 2021, but has now been modified to 13 metres, presumably to meet the requirements of the proposed district plan. Further, the minimum distance between the intersections, and if you refer to table E 10.6 of the district plan, the offset of the intersections must be 123 metres. As proposed, the distance between Brampton Drive and the proposed connecting roadway is only approximately 34 metres. And this isn't a compliant or a safe proposition. I'll just show you a copy of the... Right, so this is a plan, and you can see where the earmarked roadway is going to go through, and you can see the offset distance there is only 34 metres, and the district plan requires it to be 120 metres, 123 metres to be exactly. In summary, the proposition of this connecting roadway is not only non-compliant with council regulations, namely the district plan, nor is it with the council's own subdivision planning guide 2009. It's ad hoc and it's poor planning design practice, and it's potentially unsafe. It will also encourage rat running through a local road network if it's implemented, which is not desirable for the operation of a safe and efficient local road network. Furthermore, adoption of these standards without regard to ongoing implications and precedents, and this is really important for council, is a contravention of Section 80 of the Local Government Act. So I'd urge council to be particularly, to note that in particular, because that's really important. The revised roadway width raises questions as to what will happen with the house at number 36 Rossington Drive. I'll just show you the slide there. You can see that that line there, where's the mouse? That's only 2 meters, that distance here. So how can you have a roadway that's only 2 meters off the house? So is that house going to be demolished? If it is, I'll be hugely upset because I live right next door. But also, as I've pointed out, it's not good practice. It also brings into question the effect on the neighbours who bought their properties on the expectation that there would be never any development behind them, let alone a new road connection to Rossington Drive immediately adjacent to them. And I'll just go back to the initial plan. This is the original Gainsborough subdivision, and there's no connection showing through for any further development here. So it was sold to us as a closed subdivision with no development happening behind us, let alone any road connection. I'd strongly urge council to consider carefully the aspects of the new subdivision plan when it arrives, and ensure that at least this part of the plan is recognised as requiring a notified resource consent, and it's notified publicly, with those directly affected being allowed to have any input into the decisions made. I'd also point out that the safety and traffic analysis that came with Plan Change 74 was technically lacking, particularly with regard to network effects and safety analysis, and it should be more closely scrutinised and challenged when the subdivision plan is submitted. I would see a far better option being a connecting walkway and cycleway and as this was originally proposed. This is a far better option environmentally and would meet the council's objectives of walking and cycling for this particular subdivision. I'll just draw your attention to my last slide here. Down. This one here, this is the walkway that's currently existing through Gainsborough to State Highway 73 between number 8 and number 10 Rossington Drive. This would be something that the residents, I feel, could live with. And as I said, it would also encourage walking and cycling rather than people driving through that subdivision and creating all sorts of safety and environmental effects. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? No, doesn't look like that. Thank you. Prue, Trish, and
good morning. My name is Prue Bowman and my husband Ken is here as well. And Trish Stanfield will co-present with me. We thank you, Madam Chair and Mayor Broughton and councillors for receiving our letter and for allowing us to present today. And also thank you to Robert Love for his responses. While we received them, we didn't necessarily agree with them all. But we appreciate the opportunity to be here. Many of the matters raised are common to other submitters, so Trish is presenting as well, as I said. A common theme in our letter was our belief that SDC should and could do better with consultation and communication with residents. Better communication would vastly improve the current consultation lottery and promote social licence for developers. You can see the obvious issues raised by Colin in his presentation. Today's speaking slot is another example of communication failure in our opinion. We were told 10 minutes, which in the absence of further detail, we took to be up to 10 minutes speaking time followed by possible questions. No mention was made of only 2 people being allowed to speak. Once again, we don't know what we don't know. The team at Selwyn District Council do know, and it would be great if they volunteered such information at the outset, rather than us finding out sort of bit by bit down the track. Given the RMA has recently been replaced by the Natural and Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act, it seems you've already worked with other councils and satisfied our point about the RMA being an ass. Hopefully, the new legislation or any future replacements of the RMA will allow for improved notification and consultation with communities, including requiring plan change rezoning applicants to notify all landowners adjacent to proposed developments. Hopefully, it will also preclude applications to rezone land without the full knowledge and consent of the relevant landowners. Both of these things are failures in our opinion. It shouldn't be allowed to happen. We see that the master plan proposal is on for consultation 2024-2025. We would really like this to be well advertised to maximise engagement with West Melton's community in particular. And that really is if consultation is any use, because I'm afraid we are still very cynical about it. And as Aleta said, we have been submitting to councils on a range of things for over 30 years, and we have never felt as unheard as we do now. And it's people come to us and say, you know, what should we do? We say, submit, you know, you'll be heard. But I'm afraid we're very hard pressed to justify that will actually be the case in future. As for the simultaneous plan change or rezoning processes, we recognise that council must comply with applicable law, but we feel you should do more to inform communities of the implications of the dual application processes should it happen again. We get that you can't unwind the existing one. We do believe that there would be value in review, because obviously some knew the implications and that wasn't shared. And it would be really good if that information were available to submitters, because there would have been a lot more focus on the rezoning applications rather than just the plan change applications, if that had been the case. Of course, we don't want council to be accused of soliciting for submissions, and we appreciate that you need to remain unbiased. But the equal and opposite argument is that by not communicating and consulting more broadly, you risk perception of bias in favour of developers. So there's that balance thing going on there. We support open, full, fair and accurate public consultation. You need to find the sweet spot between seeking submissions and seeming indifferent to receiving them. We still believe council have work to do to restore and create trust in the consultation and submission process, continue to improve communication with public, the timing, the spread and the accuracy, improve the council website, level the playing field for submitters and proponents on the scope of cross-pollination of information allowed at hearings. We still feel cynical and disillusioned about the value of submitting. And as I said, we don't really know how we'll convince others to do so in future. And that to us is a shame, because we've always been very engaged with processes. And we're actually submitting now, not more for ourselves so much as the people at number 38, who were absolutely devastated to discover about the implications of Plan Change 74. We can go the other way. They can't. They're going to be very impacted, as is Colin. We suggested creating submitters advocates, and we know you've had the friend of the submitter situation. Our suggestion was that you levy the fee for that on the developers. And just a suggestion, I'm an ideas person, so I don't know whether you can, but please give it some thought, because that would allow a bit more of a level playing field, in our opinion. Pardon me? You good? Okay. We also feel you could go one step further and insert a mediation process in between the submissions and hearings and any appeals. That could also go a long way to iron out any sticking points. prior to appeals having to be heard. We would like you to thoroughly review and improve existing consultation measures, allowing for public involvement. At minimum, require plan change and rezoning applicants in particular to directly notify all directly affected parties via a letterbox drop and community engagement. Who do you, as council, consider to be directly affected parties for notification via letter? How many letters have you actually sent to the community regarding these plan changes? Because we never got one. I don't think Colin got one, or Trish, or any of the parties who had their land effectively rezoned by the original Maramatawai application, the original PC 77. Will the new legislation change and improve things for the community? It's time to update your methods of advertising too, I think, because we have family living in West Melton. They don't get time to read the paper. They're more looking at Facebook and that sort of thing. So Tim, our chair of the West Melton Residents Association, is very onto it in that regard. The social media thing is I think, perhaps your way to the future to get the younger generation involved. We would love you to require notified resource consents for plan change and rezoning applications. I know you say that it's not necessarily the done thing, but I believe where there's an effect that's more than minor, that it is something that you can require. And to us, things like the roading situation is more than minor. And that didn't come through in the consultants' reports that accompanied the rezoning application or the plan change applications for PC 74 or PC 77. So we have mentioned that we would like you to apply your own rules, and Colin covered that off as regarding the road measurements. And the cumulative impacts of plan changing and rezoning impacts, you say that they were covered in the section 42A reports. That it was a very brief skimming of the submissions made by residents, and as far as the rezoning hearing, there were very few submissions on the rezoning because people didn't really know about it, and the proponents were able to take every single iteration of their outline development plan and put the best one forward for the rezoning, where we only got one opportunity to submit on the rezoning, and that was rather accidental, I must say, whereas we were very conscious submitters regarding the plan change. So if you didn't submit on the rezoning, your plan change submission wasn't really considered, in our opinion. You have done work, obviously, with other councils to improve the RMA. It's now gone. That's an improvement. But will the new legislation be any better? That's yet to be seen. But we suspect that in a few years' time, if we do continue to submit, that we may still be talking about the same issues, just with the different act names. We would really like to see you organise litigation and liability insurance for councillors, if that isn't already a thing.
Sorry, Trish, I've
Sure.
just seen what the times.
Thank you. Okay, and the implementation of better notification via councillors would be awesome. Thank you. So we just don't want a repeat of this situation. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Just have
I say
one. Yep.
Ed, Trish.
Mhm.
So hi, and thanks for allowing us to speak. I'm not used to public speaking, and I guess I'm like a lot of the other residents who wanted to say something, but people don't want to come to this type of forum. I live at 79 Preston Ave, and my land was part of the original Maramatawai proposed district plan change back in 2020. It was a 50 hectare development at that time to change it to Living Zone Z, including my land and all of my neighbours, all the way from Halkett Road down to State Highway 73. We did not receive any notification from the council, and what we received from the developer was not timely, and we only became aware of the application at a very late stage. I did submit on that, and I know that I have a right to appeal before the 6th of October. And I didn't take up that right, more to the fact that I was concerned about the cost and the fact that I could be sued by the developer. So I just think you should think when you say that people can appeal these things, just be aware that as a person, that's not something that a lot of people would want to do for the fear of losing your house if you're sued. So basically, just in regards to PC 77, all I just really wanted to say that as part of your code of conduct, one of your values is public trust. The public of West Melton has mostly lost trust in the process. And all that we ask is that if the intent when approving PC 77 was to house retirees, that we would expect that the council would honour that intent as the developer moves into the resource consent process, that the intersection, there is only one way in and one way out, which is through the development through Iris Taylor, that is completed properly. Sorry, I don't know the proper words to use. And that the final outcome, if the developer is not able to commit to the retirement village development as was approved, and if they wish to amend the use to residential, that change must be publicly notified. There are many people that are opposed to PC 77 under the operative district plan that talked about why they opposed it as a residential development. And we just feel that the immediate neighbours must be notified of that change, and it be publicly notified, that it not just be passed as a minor change. Thank you.
Thanks for coming to speak to us. We're a little bit over time, but if there's anyone who's got pressing questions, then I'll...
Just really quickly,
Phil.
thanks, Nicole. Thank you very much for coming in. I don't have a question, just wanted to thank you all for coming in and availing yourself of the opportunity to speak to us directly. Please don't think that you haven't been heard. So I've noticed you've been reading from your notes. Maybe you could have the notes typed up and sent through to our chairperson. That would be absolutely something that we would be wonderful to hear, and also the words that you use too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the process from here is there's no paper on our agenda that this relates to. So the general thing is that staff will report back at the towards the end of the meeting when they've had time to digest what you've been saying. So thank you so much for coming to see us. We do appreciate that you've done that, and we aren't scary, but I know I've been on that side of the table and it does feel scary at times. Thank you. Okay, so the next one on our agenda is tab 4, which is terms of reference, which was the amendment adding Megan Mackay to our committee as well. That's already been passed by council, so this is just for information only. And welcome Megan, she's arrived. It's unfortunate that what happened this morning, but it's all good. Okay, confirmation of minutes. Can I have a mover and seconder from that? Malcolm moved, Sophie second. Is there any comments, changes, whatever on the minutes? I guess that's no. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Chairperson's report. So I assume you've all read my report. Unfortunately, yesterday, it's quite late to be that addition of the response to Mr. McIntosh's public forum of the last meeting. I have taken some time to do that, and hence why it is late. with the other things that are on my report, talk that I went to about managed retreat that's been done in the United States. The Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan hearings are coming up this week. This is why I've been otherwise engaged, quite busy with other things, preparing for that. So I've got the dates in there, and also events that are coming up. Was there anyone who wanted to make any comments or questions on that report? Sam?
Yeah, Nicole, thank you for your report and for the extra work that was added. My questions is probably for both you and Tim, just around the process. I mean, you did a whole lot of work there. I wouldn't normally be my expectation that that would be on the chair to provide a blow-by-blow account of what someone had presented in public forum. And so I wasn't at the last meeting, so I wasn't sure what the decision was around how that would be reported back. But just wondered, Tim, what the staff support for providing advice to councillors around how to take the public forum in the future, or was that something that you and Nicole?
No, I just took it on myself to do that. I was interested myself on that. So, yeah, I didn't even didn't talk to staff about it. So that was totally on me.
I don't think I was at the last one either.
No.
I think Bob was probably
Yep.
there, so I can't recall what happened. But normally what would happen with the staff would potentially prepare a response for to respond to whatever is raised in the public forum. I think that's how it normally works. So.
It's all right. So I move my report. I have a seconder for that, Malcolm. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So the next report is Tim's report.
Thanks, Nicole. Look, I'll take the report as read. Just a couple of things to note. I've included a series of dashboards. Normally the stat package I've included in this report, but following Sharon's direction, we're just going to add that to Diligent. I should say it's not actually there yet. It will be there by the end of the week, I understand. So there'll be some stats in there. There's a couple of things I thought I'd just mention. Building consent numbers are down by about 30 to 40%, which is probably just reflective of where we are as an economy. The appeal period for the district plan has closed. I think there's 24, maybe 25 appeals, and we'll be bringing a report about those in some more detail in November. The other thing is that we've got a full-time resource now working on our parking, and there's been a lot of activity in that area. Biggest increase in terms of the compliance team's workload, and we'll bring some more information about how that's working out in the new year. I got some detail following the last meeting in terms of how the council deals with trees, and just a few things to note. The National Policy Statement on IB requires us to probably potentially change our district plan, how we approach trees. The district plan itself got 111 trees, I think, that are included as notable trees in the schedule. So there's a couple of options around there in terms of a potential work program. It's not on any existing work program in terms of amending the district plan, but it's always an option. And then I include two policies in terms of how we deal with trees, and I include the links for those in the report. Just to note that the first policy was put in place in 2010, hasn't been reviewed. The second policy was put into place in 2021 with a review date of 2024. So there is a potential if the committees have a mind to actually look at those policies and to renew them, maybe merge them, bring them up to date in line with the committee's direction, and just being aware of the changing legislative framework with the National Policy Statement. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tim. I forgot to mention, I talked about in my report Mr. McIntosh's public forum, but we also had Sienna Fitzjohn who talked about trees, and this is where it comes back to requesting that information for Tim's report. So if there's anyone who wants to discuss more about her public forum in relation to that information that it's in Tim's report regarding what we have for trees, you're able to say something now if you want. Bob.
Yeah, just on building consents, you say they're down 30 to 40%. How do you see that going in the next few months? Do you see it continuing to decrease, or is there any reasons that?
Oh, it's hard to say. I think the election probably put a bit of a break on things, so it might start to increase. But generally, I think there's been an economic downturn with interest rates, and I can't see that changing the next year or so. But I'm no economist, so.
Sam, where are you on the list?
Last. Well, Sophie was before me.
Sophie.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you very much. I was just going to ask regarding, there's a mention of a council plan change on financial contributions. I was wondering if there's any chance of investigating in that, whether some incentives could be put in for developers who were going to leave mature, like if there's a plot of mature trees, rather than making it something that they need to replant, incentivizing them to leave the mature trees there, which partly is to do with Sienna's one, although her comment was more to do with a singular tree, but there are areas where we've got mature trees that are literally just being destroyed, churned up and burnt.
Yeah, that would probably be part of a district plan sort of framework, I'd imagine. It's probably not there now, but it's something we could potentially investigate.
Sam.
The building consent piece I thought was, I mean, it's off an all-time high last year, so there's still a whole lot of consents that your team's doing, Tim. And yeah, thank you for the work that's going on there. Mike, got a question just around the tree piece, because you've got the work program implications and talking about amending the district plan. And above that, you've said that the regional council set 10% cover in urban spaces. I'm wondering where the conversation happens for us about what we would want to set in a Selwyn context, which could actually be a number greater than 10%, and where you see that conversation happening. And just a note in the policies as you read through them, they're very much about how we get rid of trees. Like the sort of the tone is, how do I enable getting rid of trees? And there's nothing there about, you know, keeping trees in the first instance, or whatever there is around protecting current biodiversity values. Or so is that going to be a conversation that we have as the policies are reviewed themselves, or is there a plan change to the district plan that you're going to see needs to happen ahead of that work or alongside that work?
I think it's be alongside that work. We've got the Selwyn biodiversity strategy conversation later on today. So that sets out some targets, and so we can talk about that there. There will be need to be plan changes to implement the national policy statement and IB. So a conversation could also be had there if we want to do something more than the minimum required, or extend it into the rural areas. So I think there's opportunities coming up for those conversations to be had.
Cool, thank you.
I think there's also potential of us to looking to see what Christchurch, I brought up last year, that Christchurch has been doing, looking at their canopy cover and such like, and whether we more look at that as well and see with the direction that they've taken to do these. Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā rā katoa. Sam's covered a lot of the questions that I had. I guess value, book value, value of the trees, monetary value, the cost requirement to, if we are increasing, what does that look like? The impact of that financially?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that. I think it'd be quite a difficult thing to sort of monetarize. So yeah, there'll be various ways that we could achieve that increase in coverage. It could be requirements that developers do it as part of a subdivision consent. So there was some options around there, but putting a monetary figure, I think, would be very, very challenging.
Notable tree, is that species or amount, or what does that?
It goes through an assessment by a tree person, arborist, I'd imagine, and we don't actively go out and look for trees to put on our district plan. They were sort of requests, I understand, made to us to, and then they'll be coming out and assessed. I would imagine there'll be a set of criteria, which they're scored, and if they meet a particular threshold, then they are eligible for protection under the district plan.
Grant?
I'm assuming you're talking largely about urban trees because I'm a proponent of carrot, not stick in this instance, because you get perverse outcomes. And just using farms as an example with IB legislation, there's been a groundswell of farmers wanting, for want of a better word, to do the right thing and bring in Indigenous shelter belts. But they're very fearful of being caught by Indigenous biodiversity legislation, which means you can't cut them down and move them in the future. So a perverse outcome is that either you don't get them planted at all and you get more matricarpus and pines, which incidentally grow faster and do a better job. So I think we as a council need to be careful that we don't get into this wonderland of wanting to do what we think is the right thing, but actually creating perverse outcomes, particularly in the rural sector. So I'd suggest we're already seeing a groundswell through farm environment plans of change, and maybe we should just gently leave that alone and let farmers, particularly in the rural sector, get on with it.
Thanks for that comment, Grant, and we will note that as well. So, Donna, mover and seconder, and Elizabeth. Yeah. Oh, Bob, did you want to?
Just to follow up on that comment, Grant. So we are investigating through a future council initiated plan change the role of sort of biodiversity credits and offsetting. So if a farmer did have Indigenous vegetation or they did want to do Indigenous vegetation, what we can do from a credit perspective around providing additional subdivision rights on their land to help offset the cost of putting that land into Indigenous vegetation.
Okay, so a mover for report. Sam, second Sophie, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So the alcohol reports, please. Malcolm, I assume you're coming up to see us? Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. Good morning. I'll take the report as read. I'll just add a couple of points. First off, since we last spoke, the Springfield Hotel no longer sells alcohol. Their application to renew their licence failed. In fact, the evidence was so overwhelming that they didn't even appeal that decision, which is very unusual. The next hearing for the District Licensing Committee will be next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. That's for the famous Grouse Hotel. They are applying to renew their licence as well. And lastly, we've had a lot of a big change of ownership with a lot of our taverns and hotels. Usually we get 1 or 2 a year. We've had 5 in the last 2 months. There was Silver Dollar, Pedal Pushers, West Mountain Tavern, Colgate Tavern, and the Darfield Hotel. There's no particular reason. I think it's just coincidence, but I just thought I'd let you know 5 in 2 months is a lot. So, but happy to answer any questions.
Bob.
Just as far as Springfield goes, what are their options now? Does they can just
they can sell the business. So the licensee owns the premises. So he can set it up and sell ginger beer or coffee, whatever he likes, but it won't be alcohol. Or else he can sell the business and another entirely different licensee comes along and starts the pub again. So it's not the end of the world. It will just take 2 to 3 months, but that can definitely happen.
Okay, thanks.
Phil.
Hey, Malcolm, how you going? Couple of things about this, the Tavern Springfield. With it closing, it's pushing the alcohol into people's garages and book clubs. I think they call them. I guess I've got some concerns over what if we were anywhere else, we'd have the same conversation. We'll just have it here. What do you think about that? I'm a bit concerned that that's going to push alcohol-related harm out of the public eye, but it's not going to disappear. But it's just going to go behind locked doors. What do you think is our best way of getting around that?
Well, the best way around that is if someone was to pick up the licence, another applicant come along, because you've also Sheffield, we don't have a hotel there as well. So in terms of alcohol-related harm, you're absolutely right. people will drink at home or drink in garages and what have you. And then when they run out of alcohol, they jump into their car and they'll drive to Colgate or Darfield and drink and drive. And also in an on-licence, you've got a duty manager that monitors intoxication and alcohol consumption in an on-licence. You don't have that in a barbecue or in a garage or something like that. So people drink to excess. They don't have a duty manager looking after them. And when people drink to excess, man alive, that's when we have our problems, the family violence, car crashes and what have you. So
be interested to see what how that reflects in the next little while, because that's going to be something that's when I heard Springfield Tavern was closing, I thought, gee, that's actually not a good thing because Sheffield's already closed. And
well, I agree exactly with what you're saying. The sooner we can get a hotel in one of those two towns, the better. I mean, it sounds a bit funny or strange, but you're absolutely dead right.
Thanks, Aaron.
Malcolm.
Yes, Malcolm. Malcolm to Malcolm. I thought that in cases like this, quite often a family member of the owner will apply for a licence. This hasn't been done as yet.
No, we've had no applications from whether it's a family member or anybody, but family members can take over companies or can purchase businesses, even licenses for hotels. But in a case like this, it would be looked at very, very carefully by the police.
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
Elizabeth.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you with the famous grass in Lincoln, obviously it's very popular and there's probably a lot of community expectation around it continuing in the state that it does. I was just wondering what our words as we're approached by the community, what would you like us to say to the community in regards to the situation there, please?
I'll be telling the community members just to let the district licensing committee do what they do best, which is to hear the evidence. Don't make your mind up until you've actually heard both sides or both accounts, and just wait to see what transpires in that hearing.
Thanks for that, Malcolm. Shane.
Just Rugby World Cup, Malcolm. Generally, good culture, considering it's early morning, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, but I'll be there probably 8 o'clock with the kids. Good culture out there at the moment.
It's gone well. It's gone really well. Yep. All the games tend to have been 8 o'clock in the morning, not 2 o'clock in the morning, which is quite helpful. But it's gone really well.
It's good.
Grant.
Could the chair or someone provide advice? As a local, I have particular views and insight into the Lincoln situation, I suppose, and the role it plays in the community. What is our role as councillors to speak to that? Is it to go to the district licensing committee hearing and say something, or is it to speak here? Can someone provide some clarity to me what that might be?
Maybe I could pass to Malcolm or Sue in terms of the process.
I'm a witness in the hearing. Yes.
No, that's a really good question. Malcolm's a witness in the hearing, so he's not allowed to discuss it. The DLC are a standalone entity on their own, very separate from council. So whilst they're hosted by council, they're responsible for their own decision-making process. It is a public hearing. And I can't see any reason why you couldn't submit a memo or a response to our DLC for consideration at that hearing in advance. So I'd encourage that if you want to.
I guess we're often told here not to say things because we may prejudice a hearing. And if I was to speak in open terms here, would I be accused of that?
I would say if you're asking that question, I would hold back on saying anything and seek legal opinion. And we've got Alistair Sheriff that we can run any questions past, so we can do that, and then you'd have a forum.
I suppose to clarify, I'm not speaking in the negative, I'm speaking in the affirmative.
Thank you. Any other questions? No.
I was just going to say,
Oh,
sorry, we might just take a bit of legal advice and come back to you in terms of what role you can play. So I think that would be wise rather than giving us advice that's a bit off the mark.
You know, I can say, which I'm not going to harm anyone, is being there for a long time, is the role that that hotel plays within the community versus the alternative, which is what Philip said, is that the alternative is uncontrolled drinking at Coast Ford, driving, mass parties and all over the place. And they have a very, very difficult job, which they do to the largely extent of very high caliber. So I suppose I should stop there.
Do you want to mention the lawn party?
Yeah, and that's probably the evidence that'll probably come out, Grant, I'd imagine. So I think we will have confidence in the District Licensing Committee's decision.
Yep, thank you for that, Malcolm. Can I have a mover for that report, Malcolm? And Phil, second. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So the government policy statement for land transport. We have someone presenting that. Oh, thank you. Ryan, I should read my. Thanks, Malcolm. So you all have seen this submission, and Ryan, is there some comments you want to make?
I'll take it mostly as read. I guess the general gist of it, it's we're generally supportive of it. There are a few things that we kind of wanted to push forward as things to highlight, particularly, I guess, funding for our district and wider Canterbury and Greater Christchurch. We feel there could be sort of a greater focus on sort of our area with some of the fundings with mass rapid transit, which have quite progressed and will be quite fundamental in shifting sort of the sub-region's transport future. But yeah, happy to answer any questions.
And I should have also said thank you to you and Andrew for preparing it and then circulating it, and with us then having our input in it as well. So any questions, comments? Sam?
Yeah, thank you for the submission. I think the things you've highlighted are correct. The amount of money that the government's allocating to anything in the South Island is paltry compared to the North Island spend. So really great that you've lifted that up within here. But generally, the focus on increased maintenance spending is what we know our community is continuing to ask us about. It's in line with what the Canterbury Mural Forum continues to talk with. So we're in step with what the wider conversation is. And yeah, thank you for that consideration.
So I'd also just like to highlight, I guess, the other elephant in the room is that the certain parties who have done well in the election have indicated that they are looking to bring out a new GPS in their first 100 days. So it's unclear exactly how this feedback will be taken on board. Hopefully they'll still review the submissions from the councils and from everyone else and be able to integrate that into a new thing. We can only be optimistic on that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds like they're wanting to do a lot, because including the RMA going back to bit of that. So who knows? We will wait and see, or we've still got to wait and see what government they form. Is there no other questions, comments? I have a mover. Phil, seconder. Bob, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Ryan. And so the next one, National Policy Statement, High Productive Land. Rachel. You once.
Good morning, committee. So this next report seeks your endorsement of a submission to the Ministry for the Environment on some proposed changes to the existing National Policy Statement on Highly Productive Land that has now been enforced for around 12 months. The changes relate to providing a clearer pathway for consenting for specified infrastructure that needs to locate on highly productive land. And then the second part relates to proposed changes for intensive primary production on highly productive land. The submission requests that we actually provide a clearer pathway for existing intensive livestock production on highly productive land, because around 2/3, 3/4 of our intensive farms in the district are located on highly productive land, and the vast majority of them have been on those sites for decades. But there is not currently a clear pathway for them to expand their businesses. The second one is, the other part of that is around greenhouses, and the simple fact is that at the district plan / building consent level, we don't have the data to comment to the ministry on that stuff. So we're just letting them know that.
Very good. Thank you, Rachel. Any comments, questions from anyone? Sophie.
Yeah, it's really interesting reading. So thank you very much for putting it all together. I guess my question is do you think there'd still be room for, if somebody, if a business wanted to expand, for instance, you mentioned the intensive livestock and the greenhouse and everything else, would those sorts of applications still be subject to checking what sort of environmental impacts the expansion would add to where they are at the moment? Like almost as in, you know, they're present right now, but if they expand, is that actually a negative, wider effect as opposed to positive growth for the business?
Yeah, the NPS as it stands basically says that you can upgrade your existing facility, and that's it. So it's not about making these things necessarily permitted on highly productive land. It's about providing a consenting pathway where the pros and cons can be considered.
Sam?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the submission and support the direction on the 2 items that are there. Just wondered about the scope of what could be submitted on, and wondering, like, we've got a lot of highly productive land in the district, as you've said, for any processing of the protein that's grown across Selwyn, or any further refinement or adding value to what's grown here in Selwyn, currently needs to be moved to Rolleston or to an existing zoned area. And with the expansion of our production and wanting for our economy to add the value here rather than always having to ship raw products, is there the ability to have a primary focused industrial development included in highly productive land, so that it can be adjacent to where the produce is, rather than having the transport costs and emissions of having to move it around? And I would think exclusively the primary stuff. It's not, you know, opening steel mills and other paintbrush shops and, you know, things, but having the ability to refine the produce next door to where it's grown, I think has merits.
There's already a consenting pathway in the NPS HPL for that kind of thing. So these amendments are a very narrowly focused set of tweaks that either with the specified infrastructure, the drafters always intended there to be a consenting pathway, but made some errors when they were doing the final drafting, and this is to correct the oops. With the primary production and glass houses, there has been feedback from industry groups around, you're not allowing us to set up a new pig farm on highly productive land, or you're not letting us set up new glass houses that don't rely on the dirt on highly productive land. So these are very narrowly focused amendments, because the NPS has only been in place for 12 months or so. It hasn't really had the opportunity to bed down yet. Councils across the country are still figuring out, how do we actually implement this thing?
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Can I have a mover? Shane, seconder, Sam, all those in favour? Aye. Against, carried. Thank you, Rachel. And next report, Selwyn Biodiversity Strategy, Andy Spanton. Hello.
You're done. Morning, everyone. So you'll see that we have the Selwyn Biodiversity Strategy report here. And as part of the report, we're seeking endorsement for the strategy itself and also for the public consultation process that we've outlaid in this report. Just looking at the significance statement, we've assessed the strategy itself as of medium significance, and that's therefore feeds into our how we see the public consultation process being run. And while the strategy itself will have some implications for future financial expenditure, the special consultative procedure is not seen as considered necessary at this point. And I guess looking at the background of the Selwyn Biodiversity Strategy itself, we've brought this to council on a number of occasions. So I guess the council table will be very familiar with our rationale for writing the strategy, including that we had a steering group, project steering group that was formed just over a year ago, and that group has helped Denise and I to write the strategy and has had a lot of input into the especially the goals, targets, action section of the strategy. And in fact, that goals, targets, action section was workshop with councillors in April, and then recently we'd brought the strategy and the phase 1 engagement process to council for endorsement, and that was in July. I also have to note that with the strategy itself, before it goes to out for public consultation, it will be redesigned. We'll also have Te Reo and English subheadings added, case studies, photos, and breakout boxes. So the strategy itself visually will look quite different to the one that's been presented to you. Now, so with the engagement process, the stakeholder and public engagement process. So we've completed phase 1 of the engagement process, which included going out to partners and key stakeholders and seeking their engagement and their advice and feedback on the strategy. You'll see in Appendix 1, we've got that laid out, who we engaged with and their feedback, some of their feedback. And we got a lot of positive comments coming back, and I think overall the comments that we had come back have actually strengthened the strategy and have made it a better document. Now we're seeking to do phase 2, which is the formal public consultation process from mid-November to mid-December. So that's coming next, subject to council endorsement of the strategy itself. So as per the proposal laid out in this report, we see that we've laid out how we intend to engage with the public about it, the different routes, and working with our comms team on that. And then under number 5 options, we've outlaid 3 options, with the recommended option number 1 being endorse a strategy for public consultation, but not a special consultative procedure. Any questions or thoughts on that?
Elizabeth?
Hi, just a couple of questions. So with the 10% biodiversity plantings of flora and fauna on all public land, is that a part of this document and the expectation, is there a timeline drawn up for that and a budget that gives us an indication of what that will cost? Because you talk about it being in the current long-term plan, but now that it's, I'm presuming, increased to 10% recently, then that must be a much more significant budget. And the other question I had was just on the chart on you page 10 or ours 114 in the high country. So in the subalpine, it talks about key threats, lead poisoning. Just wanted to understand lead poisoning and human interactions, how they are threats, just to get a head around that. High country, harmful and inappropriate use by recreationalists, and the same for coastal regions. Yeah, just keen to hear on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, 10% cover. That is going to be overseen by Environment Canterbury. They're going to be monitoring that, and I think there's still some more work to be done to determine the spatial elements of that, because, you know, do we, for instance, will we be looking at individual townships with 10% cover? Would we be looking at overall all our townships? Would we in fact also be looking at it on a regional basis? So I think we'll get some more clarification from Environment Canterbury on that coming up. I mean, I guess from us as our biodiversity team, it's helpful for there to be support in a national document that, you know, we should be aiming at more Indigenous biodiversity cover in our townships. So, you know, we're glad that there's those targets there. I mean, it would also be interesting to know, you know, exactly where we're at anyway at the moment with that 10% and what that looks like, and some of that will be potentially we'll be able to pick up on some of the work in the blue-green strategy and some of the tree work, tree analysis cover work that is going to be done that the strategy team are looking at. So so that'll help us understand that. Lead poisoning. So that I'm just thinking that would refer to care and the effects of lead nails on the care population. And then harmful usage of recreation usage. At the moment, I'm just preparing a report on vehicle damage around the margins of Te Waihora and Green Park Sands, which is one of the most significant bird habitats in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so, you know, we're definitely seeing significant damage down there. I'm also aware of other areas of damage around Lake Linden. There are some concerns also with people cutting mountain bike tracks up in the Craigieburn Range. So I guess, yeah, we're seeing quite a lot of evidence of damage, and I guess that's also related to the widespread ownership of four-wheel drive vehicles and where people seem to want to take them.
Sophie. Yeah, kia ora, Andy, thank you very much. This isn't something that you can change or anything. I'm just wondering, in terms of the key stakeholders who were contacted as part of phase one, I mean, it's a really good list, but obviously not everybody came back with any information. And I'm particularly, I guess, concerned, to be honest, that Federated Farmers and Beef and Lamb didn't really come back with anything. Was there a particular time frame that was allowed? Like, do we know if there's a reason why they didn't come back to us? Because I'm sure that they'll be wanting to submit on this, but they've had an opportunity, and I'm kind of wondering why they didn't take it up.
Yeah, good point, Sophie. So Beef and Lamb came back and said that they didn't think it was something for them to comment on, but they were happy that Federated Farmers would take, look at taking up that opportunity. I guess what we can look at doing is actually just I can talk to one of the reps before we take it out to public consultation, and then they'll have another chance then, but maybe I'll draw it to their attention and have a bit of a chat to them and see where they're at with it. So, but yeah, we'll and I'll let you know how we get on with it.
Thank you.
Grant.
I was just wondering about the practical application of the 10% rule. Just using Kakaha Park as an example where the community desire is to have sports fields, particularly soccer and cricket and those type of things. If we put an overlay over Kakaha, can we achieve the 10% without impinging on the requirements to have open space and play areas? Because their primary role is that recreational space. We're not creating a rod for our own back and sort of all of a sudden go, oh my God, we didn't realise what we were doing here.
Your concern is noted, Grant. I guess one thing what I note is when I'm travelling around our townships is that, there does seem to be a lot of native planting being done, whether it's through, the developers and development of new subdivisions and that sort of thing. So, I guess once we understand where we're at now, what our baseline might be, then that will help us to get an idea of what the 10% might look like in the future. And also, that it's certainly not something we have to attain straight away. We've got a few years to get to that point. So.
Megan.
Kia ora. So I just wanted to acknowledge the strategy and the point that it's got to, and I can see there's been a really large level of engagement from the council on that. And it's good to turn up at the 11th hour just as it's going out for public consultation and offer support. From a mana whenua perspective, I know that the working group was only established 1 year ago, but it was actually part of the district plan, early stages of the district plan where mana whenua identified that biodiversity was something really significant to us. And we have shared our stories quite often about the change in our takiwā that's occurred over the last 200 years. So this is great to see. From a mana whenua perspective, you often hear, or council staff who reach out to us often hear, we have capability or capacity issues and we cannot engage. We're at a point that we can't engage. But we always say, however, that does not mean that we do not accept that we have a role and responsibility to be the kaitiaki of our takiwā. And so when we signify that something's really critically important to us and we're involved from the whole process and we're listened to, it's a really rewarding process and outcome for both of us. So I wanted to acknowledge this document as it goes out for public consultation, but also the journey that you've taken, because it's very much reflected in this document that Te Ao Māori has been heard and respected. So kia ora.
Thanks, Megan. Sam.
What Megan, thank you for that.
Thank you. My question is just around the end of the process. After we've gone out for public consultation, you'll bring a report back to us in the new year by the timeline here. At that point, are we offering the opportunity for the public to speak to their submissions? Do you want 3 or 4 councillors to be hearing that? Is that going to be to this whole committee? Are there some thoughts on how that process will run?
Thanks, Sam. Well, we're certainly happy to take take feedback on that in terms of if that's a process that the council would like, as some hearings, and then offering the opportunity for the public to be heard if that's what they want, and then we'd look to develop up a report for that and have some hearings and then develop up a report that we'd report back to council with, and then noting that we, arguably we would like to have the strategy adopted in March. So that's the timeframes we're shooting at.
Okay, I'll let you work with the chair on that, but I think that is a good direction for us to make sure that we do understand the submissions that are given to us and allow space for the community feedback, and as we have another.
If I can make a comment, I think the way the report was initially worded, that we were thinking that there wouldn't be a hearing, but I've had feedback from the chair and now from yourself, Sam, that it's a good idea. And on reflection, I think allowing people the opportunity to come and speak to their submission makes sense. It's a bit more transparent. So we're quite happily, if the committee's of a mind, to make that amendment and have an opportunity for submitters to speak.
So I think we should do that. Whether that needs to happen now or not, they could. We're going through the process. As long as we know that the hearing is going to happen and public know that they can put down that they'd like to be heard against their submission, and then we could choose 3 or 4 of us when that report comes back post the submissions period and appoint 3 councillors at that point to do the hearings process.
Andy, when we were thinking about bringing it back to council, it's going to be next year.
Yeah, that's right.
So we'd look at the report, the strategy being adopted in March. So
it might make sense actually to nominate and get that tidied away now, because there's not many meetings between now and March, to be honest. So I think if the committee does want to have organised an opportunity for people to be heard, that we take the opportunity now to nominate and confirm three people. And where would that hearing be, Andy? If you think, would we early next year?
February, wouldn't it? Yeah, February.
I would think, I was just discussing it with Denise before, but I think arguably mid-February.
Yeah, okay. So, shall we take nominations, Chair?
Could I just suggest on that, because people haven't had a chance to think about whether they have the time or want to be on that, just because it's just been raised now, whether we just come back to that decision after morning tea, and that just gives people a chance to think about it.
And then we can discuss about dates that we're looking at when we would just fly on the fly at the moment. Bearing in mind we're coming up to the end of October, there's not much time left in this year as well. With you wanting to go out for consultation, the dates need to be quite firm on that, so everyone knows the expectation. So we shall come back to that. Sorry, I've just been kicked out of diligent.
We may have to change the
Yeah, we'll have to change the resolution.
to reflect that.
Shall we take a break now? And then we can work out with the resolution and we can have a discussion a bit more about that. Makes sense. So maybe even half an hour. So come back at 10. So I'm looking at the time, 10:45, I suppose. Okay.
Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
And it's time to, hey, meeting, please, Sophie, over there. Thank you. So, Andy, we shall continue our conversation. So we've had got a change D to that resolution, and councillors, we have some who are interested.
If I could nominate councillor Sophie, Malcolm and Megan into those three roles to be the hearings councillors.
So everyone else is happy with that together?
This is a quick one. Will we have a chance to, obviously those councillors are going to be there representing council. Will we have a chance to get together and just discuss it fully so they can go with our thinking and our thoughts, our philosophies?
Well, if we wanted to give our thought, I mean, we most welcome ourselves to actually submit on these things if we wanted.
I mean us as a council, not individually. Basically, they're going along as our representatives to hear the submissions and bring them back here, right?
Yeah. Do you want to?
That's not, well, I take direction, but it's not normally the the process, as
Yeah.
I understand it, for these type of
Mm.
hearing panels we set up. They're there to hear
And make
the
decisions.
submissions, and I don't know if there'll be much of an opportunity, given the timeframes, to be able to do that, bring it back to the common. And normally we just rely on the expertise of the three individuals that are nominated to provide input into the hearings panel. But
So as we've never discussed this as an issue in terms of setting our own philosophy behind this, how do they know where the council stands on these things?
I'm happy to answer that. So that is what we will do today what we've already done when we endorse the program of works, when we've looked at what the strategy itself as a draft looks like, and what we've already connected in with our partners and other landowners, and that feedback to date. So that's what today is. If we approve this now for stage 2 consultation, that means we're approving what's in there as our direction as councillors, and then it will be left up to the 3 hearings panel to hear the submissions, to make any amendments that might come in through that process or not, depending on how they feel that needs to be, and then it would be brought back to council for final sign off, and that becomes our own document at that point.
Okay, thank you.
I just wonder whether we want to, whether it needs, I don't think it needs to be on these recommendations, but also just to mention that the date for the hearing will we have that by the time we want going out to public consultation?
I'll meet with Robert and work through that with him, and then we'll come up work on our timelines and come up with a date. But it could be mid-February for the hearings, but we'll certainly and then let our comms team know about that as well. So that'll be very clear in the submission process.
Yeah, very good. So everyone knows that they have that. Will have that ability to speak to the submission. Is always good to know when they're making a submission. Is there any other comments, questions? So someone want to move these recommendations? Sam, Bob, second. All in favour, say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Andy, for that. So our next paper is Government Emission Trading Scheme Consultation Submission. Keith Tellentine coming to speak to us.
Kia ora koutou. So this paper relates to a submission that has been lodged. So we're seeking a retrospective endorsement of that, lodged because of the timeframes involved. It's actually a joint submission because it relates to 2 consultation documents released by government. One related to the whole emissions trading scheme structure. The second one related to a component related to the permanent forestry category. So they were linked, and another submission that you've got on your agenda today about biodiversity credits was also mentioned in these papers. So the 2 problems identified in the consultation documents were, one, that the overall emissions trading scheme was kind of favouring offsets rather than a reduction in gross emissions. And so it was asking the question, should that be rebalanced, and if so, how? And then the second problem statement was that the permanent forest category was favouring exotic planting rather than indigenous planting, and how might that be addressed, and should it? So the submission is summarised on in the covering report in terms of the bullet points. Happy to answer any questions in relation to that. But broadly, the submission was saying that we agree that the ETS needs to be reviewed slightly more fundamentally to achieve that preference for gross emissions, and also that the permanent forestry category needs to be amended to further incentivise indigenous planting, and in doing so, any issues relating to Maori and whenua Maori need to be addressed either inside or outside of that scheme, so that it's fair and equitable.
Thanks for that. Is there anyone who's got any questions or comments? Melted. Sam?
I'd support the direction that's there. I think trying to reduce emissions, not just trying to plant enough trees to get ourselves out of this, which we know we don't have enough land to be able to do anyway. So it's a good direction shift, and appreciate the work you've done.
Do you want to move the report? Seconder? Shane, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Keith, for that. And next item, emergency management bill submission. Thank you.
All right, thank you, committee. The purpose of this report is to seek endorsement of the council submission on the emergency management bill. As you know, central government has introduced the emergency management bill to replace the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act. We've had a councillor workshop on the 13th of September to discuss this bill. The feedback from that workshop has been incorporated and formed the basis of the submission. The draft submission was then distributed to councillors for your review for 2 weeks between the 29th of September and the 13th of October. Comments and amendments received have been included into the submission. And if endorsed, this will be submitted by the 3rd of November.
Thank you for that. Is there any comments, questions on this? No, thank you. Can I have a mover? Oh. Phil? Seconder? Bob? All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much for that. And biodiversity credit scheme submission. Denise, hello.
Good morning, councillors. I hope to take this report as being read, and it seeks to support the recommendation in the report, which is to accept the submission on the biodiversity credit system. Following on from the National Policy Statement of Indigenous Biodiversity, the government is exploring a biodiversity credit system to help incentivise the protection and the restoration of Indigenous species. It could enable landowners to earn credits for protecting and restoring native wildlife on their property. Private companies, investors, etc., who wish to support biodiversity could buy credits and from landowners. So this submission we wrote was based on the questions within the decision document, and we overall support a biodiversity credit system.
Thanks for that summary. Anyone want to make comments, questions? Grant?
You might be able to explain to me. I wasn't sure what I would do with the credit if I got one. Is it dollars? Is it? Can I use it to? Can I trade it for a resource consent for a building platform? What can I do with this credit?
Well, this is something that we don't, because the government this is like a discussion document, so the government's really just asking for feedback on or ideas. Is this document which I'm happy to send the link around for, which sort of covers because they look at systems in other countries as well, because there are other countries. Australia has a biodiversity credit system, so they're really only just in a gathering information phase at this point. So there's really nothing, nailed down or hard and fast about it. It's just them asking, questions of the public and others of what we would like to see and whether we think their ideas, are workable or feasible. So there's really no hard sort of, this is more of a
You'll get a lot of people to be enthusiastic thinking there's something in it, but if it becomes a worthless credit that you can't use for anything meaningful.
Well, from what it looks, it would be a money credit, presumably, but again, it hasn't. It's just really putting the ideas out there and getting feedback at the moment.
Because
the system.
I mean, maybe jump ahead, but particularly where I live in the Port Hills, there'd be a lot of people who would say, well, if I could get a building platform, I'd give you X. Which would defeat some of the district plan rules that were sort of a backdoor entry to getting a building platform. I guess.
Yeah. No, I can't. I can't answer what it'll look like at the end, but they're just really looking for people to give them, to support or ideas of what they're thinking.
Elizabeth?
Denise, we were talking at morning tea about what I saw in the UK where a productive farmland, I think they were growing an orchard of apples, ripped out the whole orchard, and it was more profitable for them to sit on a biodiversity planting of native to the UK and have that as their profitable crop. As I see that, that gives some weight to what Grant's saying, where there's money coming in for that decision. However, my only concern here is if we do become more profitable to grow native plants rather than be food producers, farmers are really struggling right now, and that would be my concern, is that we actually could create a bigger food insecurity issue for New Zealand. And I think that food security is actually something that is should be a very relevant topic right now. So yeah, it would just be nice to know if there's any indication as to what direction they're going, and if there's anything in the links that you're talking about sending through that might give a nod to what direction they're going with this, or potentially. Thanks.
No, I actually haven't, from reading this document, I haven't, I can't really give you a steer on that, I'm afraid. But again, I suppose it's a bit like the carbon credit thing where, putting pasture into pine, and it's sort of, a similar thing, isn't it? And hopefully they've learnt, that actually, there's been pushback on that. So I hope that there's lessons learnt from that.
Sam.
Thank you, and thanks for the report. I just wonder whether, picking up on what Grant raised, we could have some examples of some things that we think could be helpful to make the system credible within communities for the long term, and that might include the tradability of the credit, the building platform options. Like, we have to say these are things we want to see, but those would be examples of things that would provide some meaning to communities. Could you just add a couple of sentences around that?
Yep.
If the committee's happy with that.
Anyone object to Sam's suggestion? I think it's a good one. No. Any other questions, comments? Thanks for that, Denise. So are you wanting to, yeah, Sam moved, someone second? Sophie, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thanks, Denise, for that. So now we have got our workshop. Sorry, that was the one. Just we've got workshop on.
Do we close the meeting?
Yeah, how does this work?
Well, so it's going to be a workshop, but it's going to be available to the public. So I would think you need to close the public part of the meeting, but then you need to go into public extension after this.
Do we need to adjust that?
Oh, can do if you want. I would try. I mean, you say
We could add with the addition, suggested additions.
I've seen examples of how the credit system might work.
We're just talking about that resolution, whether we need to add to that what you suggested. Yeah. No, okay. So with this being a workshop, do we need to have public forum discussion before the workshop? Sorry, Keith. This is the new process. So Bob, are you able to make comment and way forward with response to those ones who came and spoke to us earlier?
Yeah, and in regard to the roading side of things, so that's all relevant resource consent matters. So those both parties will need to apply for a subdivision consent, and then all those roading standards will be considered through that. And depending on what is actually applied for, will determine if that effect threshold is met on if it's notified or not. So that's all going to be a live concern. On the RMA, I guess, processing side of things, so council can't be one way or the other. We have to pretty much play the law as it is written, but regarding consultation and those type of requirements, which I feel like we have through both processes. The big concern is around district plan processes where parties only have 10 working days to absorb an enormous amount of information. So we had over 5,000 submission points on the proposed district plan, and they get 10 working days to go through those and put a further submission on. Quite often you can get things buried within those submissions. Effectively, is the case in this situation. They've been almost frozen out of the process. Unfortunately, that is the process. We can't go around that. As tough that is for our ratepayer.
We could provide a written response and circulate it to councillors and to the public forum attendees if that's appropriate. We'll do that.
In general terms, I've had a lot of sympathy for what they were saying because it reflected the responses that I've had through the district plan. And I hear what you're saying, Bob, about legislation and the need to follow it. But what concerned me, I guess, through the district plan process was the, for want of a better word, the buy-in expert, where you could have two different experts having completely disparate views on particularly land types and transport solutions. And the real concern to me, I suppose, was the perceived inability of submissions to have any effect on the outcome. And I saw that sort of firsthand with particularly laymen putting into submissions who were basically shot down repeatedly by expert witnesses and saying what they weren't qualified to speak on that issue. When they felt eminently qualified because they lived there and they had for generations and had particular personal knowledge of the land that was in question. So I had a great deal of sympathy for what they were saying. I just wonder whether, as part of the outcome of the district plan, we do post-investment reviews, do we ever do a review of what we hear from these people and how we can make the system better? Because it certainly is not working for a whole lot of people.
Sophie?
Yeah, kind of along the same lines as Grant, to be honest. It'd be interesting if there was a way of sort of doing a bit of an assessment of how well we did in that, because it was a massive process and it was a massive cost as well. So it is arguably it's an investment and something that's going to last for a long time, as in the district plan, that is. But also it would be, if there was to be a written response to Prue and the team there, it'd be interesting to know whether there is any thought. How do we chat with Bob about it? Like, would this have played out differently under the new legislation compared to the old RMA? Just because there seemed to be a bit of weight that they were putting on that as the changes to legislation are going to save us, which I'm not entirely convinced that they are. But also, if we did some sort of review there, we know that the apparent, obviously, anyway, the National Party and ACT seem to want to review the new legislation again. If that's potentially going to involve more submissions and everything to an environment committee and whatnot, then it would be really interesting to be able to say, look, this is literally what our experience and the experience of our residents was from the way that the consultation rules are written at the moment.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, while the new legislation is in, a lot of the details will be caught up in the National Planning Framework, which is still under development. So we can't answer all those sort of questions. And what the government of the day is going to do is, we just don't know. But we certainly, I guess, will potentially have an opportunity to put our concerns or our thoughts to a new committee. We just have to wait and see.
Malcolm?
And listening to the submitters today and having been on the panel of the district plan as a hearings commissioner, it takes me right back to the usual thing that we battle with in local government is consultation. The public are never happy with the consultation. We try, we go out on in the newspaper, we go out on social media, we ask them, we tell them we're going to do something, we ask them to have an input. And unfortunately, only some people take up the ability to have that input. And quite often, it's at the 11th hour that people realise what's happening. And by then, under the resource management legislation we have, it's too late for them to make a submission. There's a understandable time periods within it. My experience in being involved in many of the hearings of the last district plan was that some communities were heavily involved in submissions, and in some communities I had to read 800 submissions on that piece of work. In other communities, very few people were involved. So it's the age-old question. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. How do you get people to get involved? And that is something that we struggle with our annual plans, our LTPs, and every other thing we put out for public submission. I do feel for these people and that they perhaps weren't aware of what was going ahead. And that's clouded also with two different processes running where developers took the opportunity to try and short circuit the time period of the district plan by applying for a private plan change, hoping that they'd get a result quicker than they would out of a district plan. And that, of course, gave us different levels of involvement where people who were involved in the private plan were not aware that the same piece of land had been put in the district plan for rezoning as happened in Plan Change 69. And were upset at the fact that the door had closed on them being able to make a submission and make an appeal. So I think the late delivery of the NPSUD clouded the way in which we did the district plan, which didn't help.
Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was a bit sad actually. I think to boil it down, there was a lack of trust, lack of, as a democratically elected member, it was sad to hear that the submitters, highly educated and experienced submitters, didn't feel they had a level of trust or transparency that they needed or would have liked. So I guess the question is around the review, if there is a review required around, are we doing all we can to ensure that access to information, whether it's guided by central government or not, how do we close the gap on what the perceived potentially, that's from submitters today, what is the sentiment? And I guess councillors are more aware of that in the areas that they're working in, but how do we ensure our public and those that have a sense of lack of trust that the systems and processes that we have in place are constantly under review to ensure that there is a level of trust, we can build it back and a level of transparency?
Could I just respond? So I'm hearing that the committee might want to review. I'll just put a word of caution to that. One, it'd be quite time consuming. We're very, very busy. So I want to think about the value we're going to get out of a review. Secondly, the set of circumstances that confronted us through the district plan process are very unlikely to be repeated. We had the enabling housing supply bill, we had the NPSUD, we had a number of other NPSs that came up. So it was just a unique set of circumstances that created a very difficult piece of legislative landscape to navigate. So while a review might raise a few points, it's going to be quite time consuming, but I will take direction. I just personally wonder if it's the best bang for buck.
Maybe we could refocus it on going forward rather than looking back, and how we what do we offer these people that makes it meaningful. I really hear what you're saying, and that's what Malcolm said. The truth of it is that people see so much consultation from the council that they often ignore it until it affects them personally. I think that's particularly the roading situation is obviously a case in point where it directly affected the person.
Look, I agree with that. So I'm not cutting off, I hope, but That's a council issue, and I think probably Sharon might have I see the lights on, so that's good. Might have some comments on that.
So I'm going to raise, I suppose, comments more generically, but in line with some of the concerns that were raised, is that we need to have some overarching view of the level of consultation that we're currently undertaking in council. At the moment, for a variety of reasons, through long-term plan, through the work that's happening in Tim's team and elsewhere, we're very conscious of the fact that we have a huge volume of consultation taking place. And ELT are committed to mapping out the consultation and the when and wherefores, because we need to make sure that we give our community every opportunity to be able to respond. And it can be quite overwhelming, and we're very conscious of consultation fatigue as well. So it is very much on our radar about what are the opportunities to improve how we're consulting and making sure we get to the right people at the right time in the right place. That gives people the options to be able to feed back. And I think our first step is to do a stock take of all the different consultations that we're doing.
Can I just add to that? I think the review there's a technical aspect to that, which I don't think we should be reviewing, but it is how we approach the communications, which is currently under review with my team, with Natasha and her new team. What we have done is within the council, we need to think about the right ways of attacking these consultations. Historically, the team that are going to drive the consultation will say, this is how we want to do it, where they're not the experts around communication and how to engage people. So we're turning that around to make sure that the engagement is targeted. The number of submissions we receive is not the important thing. It's the number of eyes we get across the proposal, and focusing on the number of people who download, open, read is more important in some way than the submissions you get. Submissions will follow that. So if no one's reading it, you'll get no submissions, but if people are reading it, you'll get them. So it's making sure that we're using new modern means of communication, and Facebook is well used, but there's many other mediums as well which can be used to attract people and to inform people.
So going forward from this, so we're doing a response to them. I'm sorry, I'm a bit lost there. We've had a number of things that are brought up, very good points brought up, and I'm just trying to how we can frame this so it's not lost.
Yeah, so we'll provide a response to the points that were raised. We'll circulate that to the councillors and then to the public forum attendees. That's what I heard. And secondly, I think in terms of the other consultation piece, I think you'll see that those changes in how we approach consultation start to be borne out over the next 12 months, and there'll be pieces coming to the council in terms of what that looks like in the near future, I'd imagine.
Do you want to add to that? Or?
No, it's hit the nail on the head. It's about we will draft a response to go out, and and I think it's worth noting in that response that we will also consider exactly that, how we do the consultation and community feedback moving into the future.
Cool. Thank you.
Nicole, there was one particular question I just wanted clarity on. They indicated that their land had been applied to be rezoned without their knowledge or permission. Is that correct? Is that possible that someone can actually apply for a rezoning of your land without advising you at all?
That's correct. That would change the zoning, but obviously they'd have their rights as the owner of the property. That may frustrate the zone change, but yes, it's possible to apply for a rezoning of someone else's property without their knowledge.
So that would lead on to the cases we saw being rezoned where their rating burden increased significantly with a rezoning they never applied for. Wow.
Some of that was just the valuation with nearby land as well, wasn't it? As opposed to, but the that is an interesting situation that happened in West Melton, which was identified this morning, which you wouldn't have expected would happen, but
seems to be a loophole that someone could do that without at least advising you they were doing it. It seems, doesn't it?
And that's where the thing is, where
Normally they would advise people, because obviously if they want to rezone the land, they'd probably want to know if the person has any appetite to take advantage of that rezoning. So my experience is that a rezoning proposal would be canvassed with all landowners, but obviously this may not be the case, but I think it'd be relatively unusual.
Oh, thank you. So I think we've covered that off, and do we need to? So we've got. Do we need to move that?
So we're going to move into a workshop out of the committee meeting, but this workshop is going to be live screened, available to the. So I'd advise probably we need to close off this part of the meeting. That would be my take on it, unless Sharon has a different view.
So, because we've still got the public excluded part of the meeting to.
You can close off this part of the meeting to move into workshop and then move back into the meeting at the end of the workshop for public excluded.
Very good. Thank you. So we'll do what Sharon just said. So close this part of the meeting to go into the workshop. Do we need to move? So mover to do that. Bob, second. I'll second it then. And all those in favour? Against? Carried. So Keith, been patiently waiting. No, it's
good, thank you. Purpose of the workshop. So it's primarily to help inform a submission to Environment Select Committee inquiry. But in so doing, it gives an opportunity to sort of have some airtime for an issue that will impact the district, and start to think about how council might see itself address its roles and responsibilities as they become clarified. So it's a shaping discussion as much as it is getting words on a page for a submission. There are some slides that summarise a draft submission that's also in the agenda pack, and I'll just run through those very briefly, if that's okay.
Yep, please do.
On the next slide, I'm not sure if I'm in control of this. On the next slide, there's a national direction slide. I can do it. There we go. That really just says there are some things nationally in train and some things happening that are in this space. So in 2022, the National Adaptation Plan was published. The RMA reforms signal a Climate Change Adaptation Act to come to Parliament. We'll see if that still happens. And then there are some things happening in literally at the moment around the inquiry and a national policy statement on natural hazard decision making. The inquiry itself is titled Climate Adaptation, but it does, in its terms of reference, have a focus particularly around the term community-led retreat and adaptation funding. And then there's some other stuff under there as well. So it's kind of honing in to some extent on a particularly tricky area in relation to climate adaptation. In relation to the draft council submission, it's in your pack. Part of the reason for not bringing it to you on the full agenda was also to enable us to receive submissions from other bodies, particularly the Canterbury Mayoral Forum. That's in your pack, but I would caveat that it's still very much in draft. It's going around the traps to get consensus, but it's there for your information because we cite within our draft submission that we support it. But anyway, the time through to the submission deadline, which is the 1st of November, is being used to see what others have written and sense test that in relation to how replicable it could be for what we might want to say. But in relation to our submission as it stands, there are kind of some themes covered there on that slide, and I'll run through each of those very quickly. In relation to roles and responsibilities, the submission just points out that legislation's currently pretty ambiguous in relation to responsibilities, statutory responsibilities as well. So the RMA space is pretty good on natural hazards and decision making for new development, but in relation to existing development and issues around adaptation and retreat, there's a bit of a gap. And that we support a Te Tiriti based approach looking forward in terms of what new national direction might emerge. So the first point in considering climate adaptation is really around understanding the evidence base and understanding risk. So you might be familiar with the regional climate change risk assessment that was done collaboratively across the Takiwā, published late last year. And that kind of mirrored a national climate change risk assessment approach. But what's outlined in the submission is it's not really outlined in legislation or in guidance as to the clear steps that need to occur in relation to risk assessment, who does them, what the legal challenge implications of those risk assessments could be, and how they cascade from national to local. So all we've said is we believe that the risk assessment phase is very much an expert-led, evidence-based process without the need for community input. Community input's vital later in the process. That central government should facilitate a lot of the data gathering for efficiency and effectiveness reasons. There's a particular issue around risk tolerance. So when you start asking communities about their willingness to tolerate risk, it gets very personal, and there's investment, and to have some national guidance around thresholds for risk tolerance would at least set the parameters for a locally based community discussion. And then we support a two-step process where you undertake a regional risk assessment, which is detailed, but not as detailed as then subsequent local assessments, which hone in on key areas of risk. Following the risk assessment, which identifies key areas of risk and the types of risk, there are then really, so what do you do about it? And the submission talks about having a clear assessment methodology to go through a response to risk and to those challenges. The submission supports an adapt locally principle. So local government has a closest relationship with its communities and should be integral to that assessment. We support the PARA framework. So that's an acronym of protect, avoid, retreat, and accommodate. So they're the kinds of things that you could do to adapt climate change risk and severe weather events. And we highlight that in relation to new development, avoid seems to be at the top of that, those four options. There's another acronym there around dynamic adaptive pathways planning. So in the face of uncertainty, what that process really does is highlights things that might change, thresholds that might be reached, triggers that might change one course of action to a new course of action, or a trigger that then means that you will do this action. So it's, as the acronym suggests, it's an adaptive way of moving forward with some certainty based on the fact that the scale and pace of climate change and adaptation and risk will vary according to our emissions pathway futures. So we support that approach as a very useful tool in coming to what to do about the risks identified. Clearly, we identify community involvement, engagement as critical to this process, and ultimately that the end result is brought together within a local adaptation plan. So it's clear and agreed what's been considered and put forward, and what all parties are signing up to. So as I mentioned, there are kind of 4 options to how to adapt, and one of those would be around relocation. So as I said in a previous agenda item, as I said previously, there's a term being used around community-led retreat, and the submission that we've prepared sort of just highlights that, well, actually local government and government got a pretty integral role. Community needs to be involved in that wholeheartedly, but whether or not that term community-led's apt is questionable. It's community involvement rather than community-led, and the issue of community, the implications of communities that want to stay beyond the implications that has for local government and central government. So in relation to then any retreat process, the submission talks about, again, having that clarity around what a planned relocation mechanism would look like, so that all councils across New Zealand can have the goalposts set out and have flexibility within those goalposts. The submission suggests that whilst a chunk of the decision making might be voluntary and co-created, there's an element of mandatory decision making. So it's not, in some instances, it might not be if relocation occurs, but more the when and how. And then that local adaptation plan is really then setting out the steps involved in any proactive relocation approach. The submission also talks about, so if you're retreating from some land, that those retreating and relocating might do individually. So, just find other areas and places to live, or there may be a desire by community and by agencies to shift more wholeheartedly. But that is a bigger beast to tackle if you were to potentially look to build a new community for the retreated community to move to. And so that at least needs thinking about within any national direction as to how you enable that in a smooth and efficient way. And then the final point there is around whatever the roles and responsibilities are that they're documented in that adaptation plan, and particularly around government and Crown entities, so that that's clear and transparent. Oh, going backwards. So the submission supports treaty-based approach, so that Mana Whenua are extensively involved in the local adaptation discussions, but also where the issues relate specifically to Whenua Māori or Tonga, that the issue of rangatiratanga is framed within any national direction, so that it's more Māori-led rather than government and community-led, government and local government-led in those circumstances. Obviously, both parties are needing to work together to get a desired outcome. And guidance to that effect would be very useful. And then where the rubber really hits the road around funding issues, clearly highlighting in the submission that all elements of adaptation funding, work require funding and potentially greater central government funding. So it's not just about managed retreat funding. It's across the whole adaptation spectrum, from risk assessments, which aren't cheap, to other adaptation options. And really the submission points out that it seems highly likely that the Crown needs to be prepared to bear a large proportion of costs, and doesn't go much further, and really suggests that there's sector level debate between government and local governments to try and thrash that out. But whatever funding model is put forward, there's attention to reduce perverse outcomes, so that what it's actually trying to do is promote proactive and collaborative adaptation for the best outcomes for communities. And then finally, whilst the consultation, the associated issues and options paper that MFE produced for this inquiry and the inquiry terms of reference kind of don't focus on emergency management, our submission just points out that actually sometimes the events leading up to a larger event promote a lot of the discussion that helps inform adaptation responses locally. And so we need to make sure those connections are real and strengthened. And you just heard about the emergency management bill, which relates to this area. So I guess in summary, most of the submission points are still high level. A lot of the detail needs to get worked through and come back with specific consultation thereafter from government. And the whole government approach to climate change, climate adaptation will obviously get a refresh over the next wee while. But this helps frame what we've put to the committee. And we're suggesting that we would wish to be heard by that committee. And that would be a particular point. I just need confirmation on that. That's what you would like. Happy to answer any questions, take any comments, start scribbling.
Thanks for that, Keith. Elizabeth.
Keith, this is a really, really important topic, like probably the most significant of our lifetime, I would think. So bear with, I've written a few notes as succinctly as I can manage. I'm not opposed to the preparedness and assisting people whose properties flood. We know we've already got in the district places that have been built in really bad areas. And there are people who currently live in homes that flood regularly. And I think that definitely needs to be, you know, top of our priority list to get these things addressed. I do have some concerns around it. I understand you've done your best to write the submission. But just see if there's anything from my notes here that may help to just define a few things a little bit clearer. One of the things that's concerning for me is the loss of and not utilising the local knowledge. So we're talking about bringing in outside experts and modelling, but often this does not surpass the solutions that may come from those who've lived there for some time. And we often have families who've been on farms for a very long time, generationally, who learn to deal with flooding. So I've talked to a guy recently in the farm that he was on down at Coes Ford. He's been in the family for a long time, and they anticipate flood. So they farm to the situation and they manage that effectively. And it's actually sometimes of benefit for them because they don't need to irrigate. I'm concerned about forced planned relocation and distinguishing land titles, which was some terminology that was used in there. As stated in the Mural Forum's response, we really need to focus on working with the community to develop the solutions. I think we just need to make sure that's a strong emphasis in our submission. Talks about replacement land. Hopefully we're not going to have a repeat of the Native American Indian reservation situations where the solution was that they were giving land which wasn't as productive and it didn't have the resources that they previously had. I think it's really important that
are you referring to parts of his submission? I'm just trying to follow what. So
Yeah.
because he's got each of his paragraphs are numbered.
Yep. So I have only put numbers down for some of them for my comments. There is a valid reason why Runanga decided to live near the water. Water is the source of life and it provides a food source. This is just a a potential concern. I just think it'd be good to approach this and see whether this is, you know, if we're writing this in a way which is future proofing. We need to be really careful with the utility based approach. If it's not done really carefully, we could actually create a dangerous situation with 2.38. The right of Māori to make decisions that affect their lives create situations where Māori, so this could create a situation where maybe a Māori farm may be left to remain intact while the surrounding neighbours are forced to vacate. Now, I'm not opposed to that, to Māori being able to have the right to make decisions, but I'm concerned that that could create a difficult situation and even a dangerous situation for them long term. I feel that that's where the community could create a greater rift. And it would be good to see that acknowledged in the writing. The result of the election is possibly a result of the growing distrust in the government authority and directives. The centre point of our submission must address this lack of trust. We must be very wary of asking for stronger government directives rather than simply flexible funding and direction and community-led, including the data gathering, because
Sorry,
we've had problems.
Elizabeth, is this related to the directly to the submission?
It is.
This is what we discussed about.
It is. And even with the recent consensus, I think we need to make sure that we've got trust with the community, working with anything that comes from mandates from the government. I think it needs to be really carefully worded to ensure that we have that come through. Next point, how can we justify the cost and the reality of managed retreat as the only option when the figure given was 1 in 7 people affected? For us, this could include huge potential floodplain areas, which may involve the entire of Lincoln based on some of the modelling that we've received recently from Aqualink. I'd just like to be really mindful of how far in advance we go with the managed retreat with this, because I think it's just such an open door. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Does anyone else want to make comments? Megan?
I just have a question. So really well written submission, and
do you want to just a bit closer to your microphone? Yeah, thank you.
And I say that we're spending 5 years writing submissions for Te Rūnanga and Ngāi Tahu. So commend you. It's really thorough, and it's good that you're referring to the Mayoral Forum submission and highlighting the crossover and where we have aligned views. My question is, with working with Mana Whenua, we've recently employed, only last month, a expert with a PhD to support us with our climate change adaptation framework. And we've got a lady called Rachel Raviliad who's been leading all of our Taumutu-based climate change adaptation framework. But at the same time, I know that the Mayoral Forum's had quite a lot of involvement with Mana Whenua, and I just wanted to know if you're aware of our two kind of leading experts who are supporting us to tackle this issue.
Short answer, yes. Spoke with Faye yesterday and just had a chat about this, but also what we're both doing, and just recognise that we need to keep the conversations going. I guess in relation to comments so far, these very high level principles that we're talking about, clearly the devil's in the detail, but trying to frame a process just means that I guess everyone's clear as to how the game's being played and where our boundaries are. There's a lot of issues as you actually open up those conversations, and probably a specific reply to Elizabeth was, I don't think the risk assessment approach was trying to discount local information. It was just trying to suggest that a lot of the data sources are held nationally, supplemented by local knowledge. And there's a point around Mātauranga Māori as well, feeding into those risk assessments.
Anyone else want to make comments? Grant.
I do, Madam Chair, but I'm aware that I haven't got my paragraph numbers lined up. I'm a bit scared of the Chair's response.
Okay, just in future, you take that on board, please. But thank you. Go ahead.
I suppose the key one is clearly identifying what the role of landowners' responsibilities are in this. We're talking a lot about central government and local government coming to the party, but I think what concerns me is this almost attitude of, well, I can buy there because the Crown's going to bail me out. And I think once land is identified, perhaps, if you willingly buy into that situation, wanting someone to bail you out in the future, I'm not so certain that the ratepayer should bail you out. And it's a difficult conversation to have, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed. But one of the things I was interested in, and I think, as Megan said, it's a very good submission, is particularly around relocation. Are we suggesting it be event triggered, or is this planned location? So are we going to sit there and wait till multiple events happen and say, okay, this is a community that needs to move? Or are we suggesting through our studies that, okay, we've decided that in X date you are going to move, and this is the date? Because clearly what you're suggesting around the checkerboard effect of some leaving and some not, well, if we decide that it is a climate change community, clearly you shouldn't allow anyone to stay. It's either it is or it isn't. So one of the things I really liked in your submission was clarifying the insurance provision and the continuation of insurance, which I thought was really good. I wondered whether we should be considering the creation of a Crown body like EQC, or some methodology of creating a funding body which collects levies through insurance now to build up a fighting fund for this, and then whether we submit that in our submission. The last thing is that you've mentioned it briefly, but I think it probably needs a bit of expansion. I think particularly around, we are unique around Te Wahora. I think we've got a climate problem there, which is going to hit us around how we manage the lake levels and the surrounding environment, which is not just related to housing, but it is to the whole environment there. So I guess how we have specific natural environments that need assistance through this climate adaptation might be worth including in the submission. Thank you.
Anyone else want to comment?
Just to highlight that there are two documents that are hyperlinked in the cover report, and they do traverse some of those issues in some detail, but they don't come up with potential solutions, more options. But I guess they've been daylighted as issues that need to be resolved.
Sam?
Yeah, thank you. And great submission. I think there just need to be something that's really clear, though, that shows the spectrum of responsibility from private landowners through to the public, that has a time frame included on it, and that provides a certainty of direction, and also the responsibility for where the funding and cost and challenges is going to sit. If you bought a property in 1968 and are still in it now, chances are when you bought that property, you didn't have all the information to understand the effects of climate on that property, and there's probably some form of social community input that's going to be required to help those situations. But if you bought a property in 2015, I'd argue that there was plenty of information available at that time, and we've probably moved through to the space there where the responsibility is personal on the property owner, and somewhere between mid last century and today, or maybe that date's in the future and it's 2035 or 2045 when it becomes fully personal responsibility. But through that time, there's a shifting of the responsibility, somewhere between 0 and 100 on both sides. And the public portion needs to include both government and local government contributions, not just thinking about the local government contribution in that space, recognising that any partnership with the government should start at a 10 to 90, with 90 being the government funding, whether it's buyouts or the contribution to planned change, because the government has 10 times the amount of funding available to it than local government does. So I'd like to see something kind of concrete come out of this, and I think that New Zealand needs some certainty on where that sits. I think we do need the national direction that would then enable councils all around the country to say, how do we enact this locally? And that might start to look a little bit differently. And I support what was said about managed retreats, if we can use those terms, because it does mean it's done ahead of a disaster. If it's only in response to a disaster, that's not managed, that's reactionary, and that's about response to an incident. So yeah, I'd like us to challenge having firmer direction from the legislation when it comes out.
Sophie?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's, yeah, nice, very, really comprehensive, so thank you. I guess I tend more towards wanting the government to just lay this out pretty strictly, because when it comes down to actually having these events happening more often, which is already starting to happen, you don't get much time to muck around and debate over the interpretation of a pathway. But I just wanted to say thank you for linking those other documents as well, because they did have some really useful information in there, especially the expert working group one. In 1.3 though, you've mentioned the Aotearoa Climate Adaptation Network submission. We haven't got that. Is that available or no? Okay.
So I guess when it becomes available, if you're happy, I'll do a cross check to check alignment. If it's not aligned, we'll drop that phrase. If it is aligned, we'll keep it. Similarly, potentially, we've got Taituara and LGNZ submissions, which we could cite support for. Yeah, but some of those
kind of a filler paragraph.
Any other comments? No. Thank you. So that was workshop, so I don't have to, there's no moving or anything. So thank you, Keith. So going from here, what is going to happen with this?
Shall I lead off, Tim? So what I suggest is if you've got detailed comments, feel free to email me so I can be very clear about those comments. I'll try and take on board as much as possible for a draft, a submission draft, a further draft, and I'll hopefully get that out. It'll be tight, but before the deadline, so you can see that change.
Yep.
And then it will come back for you formally to adopt retrospectively.
Cool.
That works.
Yep. I think that's fine. No one else has got any comments on that? Cool. Thank you for that, Keith. So we have to start the meeting again. And resolution to exclude the public. Seconder, Shane, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So just wait until the live feed